So, welcome. Good to have you here. Thanks for bringing your children to me. It's always fun to work with them. So, I thought I'd go over this because some of you are newer, even though all of you have had talked to each other and had some exposure. Then I want to go over some of the basics of RPM, why we're doing what we're doing, and I want to make sure we have time for questions, and regardless of what level you're at with them, your child. So, rapid prompting method was developed by someone, as you probably know. And it's education, but it leads to, of course, communication. And then the goal really is to a lot of just functional life skill. So there's really pretty much anything you want to teach a child that it works. And the reason why we start with the education and the letterboard has, I'll come back on at some point, right?
Take about 2 minutes here.
Yeah. So the reason we have the letterboard is that it starts with like a 2 dimensions. So the 2 dimensions is easier to navigate. The concepts of academics helps the regulation happen, and then it can be easier to start working on navigation to a full room. So there'll be many students that get to the point that they can spell paragraphs and really fluently on the letterboard, but when you say, go grab your shoes, and that's directing their whole body to aim at it, and they can't do that, not because they don't understand, but just because that's a lot more connection that's required for them to do that. So that's where we're starting with the letterboard, and then of course you can work on those things in the meantime, but the next steps basically are beyond communication is these other skills that are trying to help them with living their life and having it that way, right? Okay. So, someone has a connection course that really focuses more on that aspect too, if you're interested. So, to do the lessons, as you probably kind of noticed here today, or what you've been doing in the past, what you want to do is you want to have that back and forth kind of performance between teacher and student. So, in other methods that are broken off from RPM, they'll use much of the same philosophies, but they will do sometimes paragraphs of reading and then ask questions. And that can work for certain students, but not for all of them. So,
If it's distracting you, maybe I'll take you down.
I'm okay with whatever you want.
You wait, Divya, wait. Usas, come with me. I'll leave it with Cody. Come here.
Yeah, he's good though. I'm okay with whatever you guys want. He's fine to be around. So the back and forth just helps teach the idea of communication of that, and then also for many students, they're moving just like that, right? So if you're just sitting there talking while they can hear you, it can get them dysregulated as far as their output, so they're not ready to spell for you. So for those types of students, usually that paragraph from the break off doesn't work as well. Until later on when they're working on like really listening for a longer time. So this teach and then ask just to keep this balance there and keep the student with you. So you'll have some of your children that need a really quick response, again, shorter amount of teaching, and some of your children will do better with a little bit longer. And as they progress to longer responses, then they will have you can talk for a longer time. Just because that's normal with communication, right? You tell a story, and the person responds, tells their story or comments, and then it goes on. So, to begin with, I think I want to go over, okay. I think a lot of you already understand this, but just to make sure to get a little bit more science behind what we're doing here. You have, in the United States, we do a lot of IQ testing, I assume that's happening here too. And that IQ test is presuming basically that the student has the connection to actually show what they're knowing. So a lot of our children, they'll try and do modified test or whatever it is, but that's not really working because it requires the connection between the brain and the body to be there really well. So it's kind of a simplification to talk about this way, but I think it does help. If you think about, gosh, you guys can do this with each other. If you've ever tried this activity where you flip your hands this way and someone points to your finger and asks you to like point with the finger. So if you've tried that before, you may find that you know what they're saying, of course, but you don't always pick up the right finger. You lift the wrong finger, you kind of, some students it's like 5 fingers, some of us it's like 5 fingers before we get the right one. So that connection is really what our children are dealing with. So when people have labeled it high functioning or low functioning, they're really just talking about how fast, how connected is that area. And so it's not about intelligence. You can know just as well as the person next to you what finger you should lift it up. But imagine that being your whole body, that you know your mouth and your tongue needs to say a certain word, but it doesn't come out. Whether you say the wrong word or you can't say anything at all. It can be even with your eyes. Where do you look? Getting your eyes to look where you're supposed to look. Someone says look up and you're stuck looking down, you can't get your eyes to go up. It can be with the whole body, any kind of movement. So having the ability to move does not correlate necessarily with moving correctly. Just like you all can move just fine, and you're going to have different levels of how fast you can lift the correct finger up when you've twisted your whole body around for your mental math. So that's the best way I can kind of think about describing that disconnection that can happen for a child. So that's number one. Just keep that in mind. So that's happening in RPM, and we're dealing with a lot of that stuff by the way that we're prompting them, holding the letter board, the pacing of the lesson, which changes for some students based off their pacing, and that's what's determining how we are going to teach them and the success. So if in school you're frustrated because at school they can't do this or that, or at home you haven't seen this or that, it's just has that accommodation happen? And if it hasn't, you can have a person who's perfectly capable of learning still stuck at first grade or like a 5 or 6 year old level that really can do their high school or their college level work. So just keep that in mind. And so when you're going home trying to implement whatever I taught you or what another therapist has, don't be alarmed if there's a big mismatch just because you're learning the coordination, the technique, and the nuances. And so just because they made it to a certain level with me doesn't mean that you're going to go home and see it immediately. In fact, usually you don't. So if you do, I'm like, what happened? So once in a while, I've had like 2 cases of my hundreds of students that the parent went home and pretty much got it after like a few weeks there. For those of you who've been doing it longer, you may see certain things immediately happen because you're like, oh, I got it, I know what to do. Whereas those of you who are newer may take a little bit longer to get that. So don't be alarmed, it's perfectly normal. It's just learning all the little parts. So when you're looking at the prompting that's happening at RPM, it's called rapid prompting, and that's kind of a misnomer because it's not about speed necessarily. It can be for certain students, but it's really more about constant, and then you're fading it. And why are you doing that? So the constant verbal or just things to keep them engaged is, one, helping them with initiation. So when it comes to autism and related conditions, initiating movement, stopping themselves, starting themselves, doing different actions is the issue. So you'll have kids that have ran down the street, people are saying, stop, stop, and they're still running. They're not trying to be disobedient, they literally cannot stop their body. So you have to basically train their body to learn to stop on command, both themselves internally in their head to be able to say stop, and also to hear a voice say stop and stop themselves. So that's something that's happening. Same thing with a letter board. So you may have a child that's spelling on a letter board, and so they're going to spell like the word bat, and they go B and they get stuck going like this. That's not an issue, not knowing they should have gone over there, but they have to initiate the movement. So if you don't have the correct prompts in place, you're going to see a lot of just random tapping on the board. Not due to cognition, but just they don't have the support essentially to get it going. So the prompting is to help that. That prompting is not always the best word because sometimes you're not like actually prompting them to do a certain letter. It can just be and keep going. Like it's just more of a nudge to move. Of course, at first we were teaching phonetic sounds or giving gesture prompts to help them with words that they they're going to spell. Then that's a different thing. You're still training them to move, so you give them information about where to go. But a lot of the prompting is not that. It's just keep going. And so it changes based off if the word that they're spelling is something that you know, and the student knows that you know what they're spelling, versus a word that they're coming up with on their own. It would change the prompts. And it's the course of RPM is designed to allow them as they go into their own words to have some prompts that are faded more and more as they get more and more towards their own thought thinking. And then it really matters what they're spelling. So keep that in mind. We are prompting, we're aware of it. It's not a claim that they know how to spell everything, that they have this magic abilities. That's not a belief at all. It's just a belief that they are in there, but they can't understand or learn, and that is the best believed to actually get success for the student. And then that fades. So Soma has always mentioned, regardless of the method you're doing, if the prompts are not fading, then it's not working. So in RPM session, if you are feeling like you're stuck on that level or something, then just maybe they switch something up to figure out what will really help them. When you progress to more letters, to typing versus the stuff on the letterboard, handwriting, a new skill, you'll increase your prompts again, and then you'll fade them out. So that's pretty normal stuff. So be aware of that. So a student may, I get to a point where for some kids I can just go like this and they can spell sentences after sentences and just sitting there. Then I work on putting it on the table, and then they go, and suddenly they need all these prompts again because you changed the board is at, you're not feeling the security of you're holding it, even though you're holding it still, that kind of thing. And so that's changing, a big change for them, that's not a big change for you and me. So let's talk a little bit about that part. So for each of us, when we're learning, we have to integrate our visual, auditory, kinesthetic, which is movement, and our tactile learning, and of course other things like our proprioception and such. For our children, that's not always integrating well, and it integrates differently. So you can have basically 3 different states that you're in. Generalized is what we're typically in, where you can look at me, you can look down at your notes, you can easily control that. Even if you feel like standing up right now, you're not going to randomly just jump. You're not going to randomly jump up and run. You can keep yourself sitting down even if you don't feel like sitting. You may feel hot in a room. You can stay there. Not going to rip your shirt off because you can handle yourself there. So that regulation is something that means that you're generalized. And you can basically block out a lot of stuff unless it's too extreme. So you'll have a hard time with heat or cold when it's way extreme, having a hard time filtering it. Where our children, it can be a very mild change for certain ones. Other kids' temperatures not a big deal. So that's why tags on a shirt can really irritate them. It bugs you, but it could really irritate them. Or how their socks positioned or whatever else is going on in their body. So prompts are also used to help them ignore that kind of stuff. So it would irritate you if I was saying, reach out, keep going, be quiet, let me think. For them, that's how they can actually get themselves to focus in and do it. And of course we can be annoying to them too. Some kids start knocking me. Okay, maybe I need to change my prompts. So those 2 things are important to think about. The prompting, just to know why it's happening there. So if you are sitting there going, let me see if they can do it, and just holding it frozen, then you're going to see a lot of random tapping. So keep in mind that you are teaching, not testing the child. So even though you're teaching and asking, you're not testing how smart they are or something. You don't want them to feel that way. So you may have noticed in your sessions, those of you who had sessions with me, that sometimes I'll phrase a question like, so if your friend asked you, what did you learn about today? You would tell them what? So it doesn't feel like I'm saying, what did I say? It doesn't feel like it's drill. It feels like, oh, I would tell them that. So it becomes more conversational, not so scary if they're being tested. So I am checking for listening in my own technique, really. Am I doing it well enough that they can get the responses correctly? Because, so the main kind of foundation of RPM is you teach, write a keyword or so, and then ask for the information back at the beginning stages. And then even when it's later on to kind of keep the information in. So the reason for that is, one, it does help the information stay in their head by being multisensory. So you're writing the keyword down, that's kinesthetic and visual. You're saying the letter, that's auditory. And then when you ask them, they have to take their pencil that's tactile or their finger and then move it, kinesthetic, visually look or at least attend somewhat to the board if they're not looking, and then hear. So that integrates the senses to help them remember the concept. Then the second thing that really we're kind of focusing on is how is my teaching, because it doesn't matter if you taught me a foreign language. So I have with my nephew, I have a nephew I do this with. I taught him a lesson in French. I don't know French really, but I was learning some, and so I did whatever it sounded like to me French. But I was just doing teach and ask with French. And I wrote down the keywords, and he got 100% right with the choices on like 5 different questions. And he didn't struggle with it. Why? Because he could hear what I said, saw what I wrote, and pick the right answer. So in other words, if it doesn't require language understanding to do that. It just requires some So I just told him in English, when I ask you to sit down, I'll just pick. And then he went to the lesson and he did just fine. So when he picked them, and he did enough trials, of course, he knew I already knew that he understood things, but he could tell me. And my sister, who also didn't speak French, watched and knew that he was getting them correct. So when you teach a child, if they're not getting them right, then you know you need to adjust something. So that's a helpful thing for them to see. Hey, can I use you for a second? Can you help me for a little bit? Yeah, sit right there. Let me just show you. Yeah, can you stay right here just for a second? You're gonna stay in this room. You're gonna help me out. Look at this. We're gonna sit right here. S-I-T, sit. You're gonna help me right here. You and me. I didn't have this ready for you, did I? This came at the perfect moment. So I'm like, hey, this is what I'm gonna do. Okay. So here it is. So S-I-T, sit. So you and I'm gonna have you do what? What did I say? Let's see what we got. You're gonna help me out here. Please run forward so I can pair it all. There you go. Right here. Now, S-I-T, sit, or S-W-I-N-G, swing. Ready? Sit or swing. Go ahead and show me right here. Take that pencil. Let's have you pick. Sit. Okay, the finger, that works too. Okay, so you gotta sit. Now I'm gonna help you right here. We're sitting on something soft. S-O-F-T, soft. So we're sitting on something what? B-L-A-C-K, black, or S-O-F-T, soft. Okay, tell me out here. Is it gonna be black or soft? You can use your hand. I don't want to be here, huh? Don't let me get just one more question and we finish. You just walk away. Out here is soft. Okay, that's good. Right here. There's black, there's soft. Try touching it. There you go. Push it forward. We got it. I know, it's hard, huh? Because you've never haven't done it before. Here you are for show, huh? That's not fair. Okay, use your feet. Go like that. Go like that. You want to show me? Okay. I'll try a new way. Let's go like this. I'm going to pinch my face. I know, because that's annoying. I'm going to do this. Okay. You ready now? See if you can grab it. Yeah. You grab me too? Okay, I'm going to help you like this because it's kind of embarrassing for you to have to be in front of everyone. I'm going to go like that. Okay. Soft it is. You know, you're kind of looking at it, hovering over it, so we're going to count that. Okay. Thanks for helping. You can run away now. So what I'm going to look at then, of course he's in front of everybody, but I would be looking at, do I need to rip it? Do I need to have tape on this? Does he need me to walk side by side with it? So if he's not picking, you saw he was not picking. So he wasn't missing. He wasn't not understanding me. His hand was just like, how do I move this? So he had the double in front of everyone too. But so that's why you want to do that, because if he's not, then I have the job going, how do I get him to point for me? So then I'm going to try a variety of things. So if you don't have teach ask, then you can't build that skill. You can't ask him a question about what he needs to do or anything else, because he hasn't got the learning to pick, and we need to be able to help him get it right. So that's important. So then basically you know if your child's not getting those answers correct, you need to adjust something. And that's the key thing. So don't blame it on the child. Of course the child can misbehave or whatever, but he was not misbehaving. He's just wanting to get his permission first. But also he's got all these different things going on sensory-wise that he's dealing with, so he couldn't just show in front of everyone unless we work together. So that was actually impressive what you did do. And so just keep that in mind. Don't use as a penalty against the child when you don't get it right. Use it as perfect. Pay your attention. Use it as an opportunity to figure out what you can change. Whether you're pacing, sometimes we end up going too slow if we don't know if they're understanding us or listening. Whether it's a speed, slower or faster. Generally, if you're talking way slow, then they're going to mess up just because it's kind of dragging. If you're talking way fast, that sometimes helps you as listen and have students say that. Other times, they don't need that. So, thank you for helping me. I should have got your permission. I apologize then. We'll work tomorrow on it. You're going to do amazing. Sound good? Good? Say good? Good. Excellent. Okay. So just keep that in mind, that you're just checking to see what you need to fix as a teacher, and that's the important thing. Okay.
Yes. You're beautiful.
So a couple things, when you're doing a lesson, to begin with, like a starting lesson or just to kind of make it manageable, think about consistency to get the rhythm in, don't think about a long lesson. So it's better to do like a 5-10 minute lesson a day versus 1 hour, some random time or something like that. Now, there are some of you who are maybe more advanced where that 1 hour can be great, whatever it is, but try to get consistency, but don't overwork yourself, because when you're starting, there's a lot of little nuances you're learning, and so it's very discouraging if you plan this, spend an hour planning your lesson, you're going to teach it, and it rips the paper, won't touch anything, and it's kind of just difficult. Thanks for putting that down. Then it kind of gets discouraging. So in order for you and your child to feel successful, then start by teaching a short lesson, start getting success, and increase the length of time. And that can be a 30-minute lesson too, just depends on what you feel is happening. But I would say start with 5 or 10 minutes, it's easier to start with psychologically too. So what you would do is start with, I'm just going to put this here if you want to take pictures at the end. Start with 5 statements is what I would say. And this is literally 5 sentences that you teach. So whatever your child's age is, you're going to find 5 statements that work for their age. So you're better off introducing something, for the more part, most students, introducing something new and a little bit higher level than you think versus aiming way low to make sure that they got it. There are a few that the anxiety is so high you want to start with some familiar stuff, but still new information. But for the most part, start with that. Then you're going to just write out those 5 statements so that you can connect. Yes.
Did you say that we should ideally probably start with a topic which is more relatable? Or you're probably saying that we should probably start with a topic which is maybe like something like a surprising element? Or maybe something which is like more high than we would imagine.
Yeah, so try something that's age appropriate is the idea, but if you're trying to figure out, then try something novel usually. So if you start with like colors, for a lot of students, they're like, I've done that so many times. But it's not bad for you to say, wow, my child loves trains, so to speak. Then teach him 5 new facts about trains that he probably doesn't know. That way you connect it into interest. So there are some students that you need to do a little bit more with that, and I get the sense from what I've seen that you guys have already started working with your children on something, so you don't have to break it down the same way somebody in the United States that is less diligent on that. So you guys have already been working on it to some degree. So yeah, good question. So you might have a child that needs to do a little bit more familiar, but you still want something new. That's the key thing, something new that they haven't understood. So a couple things to keep in mind with that. They're going to have overheard TV being on, people in the environment. So not looking, again, he's walking around, but he still hears me. It's not like he didn't know what I said to him. He may have had like, whoa, what am I supposed to do right now? This crazy lady just came over to me and there's always people watching me. So he may have started blocking out some things because he's just overwhelmed with what just happened to him. And, but he wasn't having a hard time understanding what's going on. In fact, he even sat there kind of, what's she doing about here? And I'm assuming he's kind of listening to what was my thing. And you'll have some of your children that are kind of going in the session, and then I start talking, and sitting there like, this is what's going on. So you can see by that, just that sitting there that they're attending. But even the walking, so you'll have a child that walks around the room, they're listening. Assume that. So anytime you see a child in the environment, staying in the room, and they could go, assume that they're listening to what's going on. And of course they might not be, but generally they are. So if that's helpful, before I go back to this, think in terms of when you're doing things, you can talk. So for instance, some of you are drinking a drink. I'm not assuming you're not listening to me anymore, even though you're now focusing on your water, drink, or whatever it is. You can drink and listen at the same time. Now, if you started going like this, you still can listen. It doesn't look normal, but you can still listen as well. So just keep in mind that your child may look like that. They may be doing something very odd, or to us odd, that looks like they're not attending, so they're not looking at your face, they're singing the song, or whatever is going on. But just think, okay, you cook, I can listen to you while I cook. I can fix my car, I can listen to you while I fix my car. So you can do that until something becomes very precise, right? And kind of follow the instructions for a bit. And that can happen with our children. They can be standing in all files and like, wait a second, okay, this little thing just right. And they might block me out for a second, but for the more part, they're listening to you. So just assume that. They may check out, but that's not going to be normally why they miss the answer. They're gonna miss answers due to, did you position the choices too far, too close, too high, too low, to talk too slowly? Did you repeat over and over until they kind of just like, no, it's kind of out of sync? Did you give them the right prompts? Those are the types of things that are usually in the way, or it got really easy, and so then they're like, okay, I'm done. So if you notice that they get 100% wrong, and they're choosing different sides, then you know they tried to get it wrong. So we also get 100%. So then you can know you're actually doing well with it. But if they're swiping, as if they're really distinctively picking, then you can tell that they really just kind of bored or kind of just being a smart, we call it in the United States. So just that's another reason. They could also get it wrong because they're bored. That's why I say if you're in doubt of where to go a little bit higher than you think versus lower, and you usually have it, oh, wow, mom and dad believe in me. That's a huge element of it. So if I say the foundational piece is belief, that doesn't mean that that's easy to do, because it is kind of an act of faith at first. You're like, okay, you're sure? As for me, I see this happen in every child, so I don't have a single doubt when a kid walks in the room that your child can spell and learn how to spell paragraphs. And every single child I saw today, I'm sure can get to the paragraph level, no problem. Where it's like really just held still and they're just spelling. But as a parent, you know, trying to do the best thing for your child, it's understandable if you have doubts and skepticism and just need to have clarification. So don't feel bad about that. Just know that the more you can go into a lesson going, I know you understand me, the issue is not you trying to be dad or not understanding, the issue is you need to figure out the technique with you and you kind of come together, the better you have success. So keep that in mind. So that will really help you, and you can even say there are some parents who have sat down with their child and said to them, I'm trying my best. Right now it may not be very fun, as maybe it was with the Soma or whatever, but just be patient with me. And many students responded well to that, and they're going, oh, my mom, one, or dad sees me as a competent person, that I can be told that. That's a huge deal. And then two, they'll sometimes have compassion. Not always, there are some kids like, I don't care, then let's not do it or whatever. So you'll have some that are not every child is dying to communicate, even if they would like to. I've even had child spell saying, I hate this, I'm glad I can communicate, but I hate this. So they just...
I experienced this with my child, just sharing, right? Before I came, he was quite unhappy because we had to travel a lot, right? We come very far. And I just I kind of gave him like an emotional speech for like 60 seconds. It absolutely just, it was like a switch. He cooperated with it.
Oh, cool. Thank you for sharing that, yeah. So, yes, so that's important. Just kind of look at that they're going to have different emotions or feelings, and that can help. So the more you go about it, where you think, okay, they missed, not because they don't know, but because I didn't do this or that, then you change how you talk to your child, and then you feel underneath that you believe versus it's doubt. That doesn't mean if you have doubts you can't have success, because a lot of us start out with doubts. That's just normal. You're worried about your child and what's best for them, and so you don't want to be deceived by some plaque there or whatever it is. So that's normal to have your doubts, and that's fine. And a healthy dose of skepticism isn't bad to have at times, just because you want to keep cross-checking yourself. So I'll even watch my videos and go, oh, that's what I was doing, I didn't know that. Let me fix that or something. So as long as you lead with belief, those questions and stuff are just fine. So start with belief, and then you have the 5 statements. So don't keep it complicated. So if you're teaching, say like a 6-year-old and your children are younger, you might say, start out with, when it rains, we should say, let's do it here. Rain comes from the clouds. Comes from the clouds. So now you have 2 keywords basically. You have the word rain and you have clouds. So you might write them both depending on what your child needs. If they're very visual and watching, you might write the whole sentence. If they're kind of more over the place, you might write 1 or 2 of the words. Then you can look at these 2 words to connect this. The clouds, so I'm going to use this, are in the sky. So now I could connect with cloud or sky, or you can go back to rain. And so my main keywords that way, this is when you look says the rain. So then I would go to my next sentence connecting here. It can also hail or snow from clouds. Now this is depending on if you want to, this is if you're not around where that happens, since many of you are not. So then you have this one where you can look at the, hail or snow. And then you can do your next one, could be something like lightning and thunder happen when it rains or whatever. And then, so that'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, and then 5 could be like lightning comes from electricity or something. So now you have 5 statements in your teaching. Then from those statements, you have these keywords. So at first you're going to have, you pick out which you're going to ask about. So usually the last word is the easiest to ask about. So when rain comes from the clouds, so what did I say? Rain comes from that? Then this is the last thing they heard, so they can easily get that. But you want them to be able to go back and pick out hail from the whole long sentence, or pick out lightning as well. So you want to basically make sure they have that ability. Then, after you did teach ask for it, so you teach it, you ask, you might want to expand. So at first you may do a lot of teach ask and expand at the end to basically make them reason about something, or you can do it in the middle of it, depending on your child and what you think they need. So, you got rain comes from the clouds, so you might say, okay, when you think of rain, what do you think of? Do you think of, if you're doing the choice level, whether it's first letter choice or the paper choice, do you think of water, or do you think of sunshine? And they can pick whatever they want. So they pick sunshine, even though that I would probably pick water, right? But you may say, yeah, after it rains, the sun comes out. So you can make it right, essentially. And that can, yes?
Sorry, so that does mean if they are picking up a wrong option, we do not discourage them saying that's wrong and try to modify it to tell them, yeah, that's true, but this is also, or modify it in such a way that you are teaching something else to them. But do not outright say you are wrong, because my daughter doesn't like when I say you are wrong.
Yeah. So generally speaking, yes. There are some times that you can say, just look at that again and try it like that. Be careful, because you're right. If you use words like nope or that's wrong or something like that, it kind of feels like, I got slapped. So you want to, normally you'll see me say, oops, 1 letter off, or I can see what you meant. Yeah, or in this case, twist it to the right thing. But in this one, when you say, do you think water or sunshine goes with rain, for their perspective, they may be focusing on the sun coming out at the end. So you never know what they're thinking, too. So this could be one where it is a slightly opinion, but it lets you know that if they're being accurate with teach ask, that that choice is a different encoding of the situation than you and I would have. So yes. So basically you want to help them. It's not that you don't ever let them know that they got it wrong, but you definitely teach them and twist it into it. So someone uses an example of, you were sitting in a chair. What are you sitting on? Are you sitting on a chair or a tree? The big tree, you say, think you would be a bird. So then it just kind of becomes a fun thing, like, oh yeah, be a bird, imagine that. So so you can do that. And then they already know, oh, I got it wrong, but they didn't feel like, wow, I just thought of being a bird. Isn't that cool? So it becomes more positive. Yeah, good point. So with your child, you would want to be more careful about twisting things in the right answer, where some of the other ones would be fine, like, that's an interesting way of looking at it, and you can be more corrective. Yeah. So you can start with that. So you can ask a reasoning question at first. Then you can also ask, sometimes you can do some opinions at first if you need to. You can do things like, do you like rain, yes or no? That can work for some students. But if they're really just kind of getting their aim in, then you can't really rely on that answer. So sometimes we'll pick yes and no responses when we know for sure what the answer is, so we can help them get it right if necessary to help them focus themselves. So keep that in mind. Then here with like the clouds are in the sky, what else is in the sky? And then like hail or snow. For me, I can ask a question like, or actually you can ask this too, yeah. You could say, you'd know as a parent if they'd experienced hail or snow, so you'd know if you need to expand on that or not. But you can have a picture ready as well. So it's not just written things, you can have pictures and drawings. It's actually pretty important for some students. So like your daughter today, I was doing a lot of writing and drawing because that helped her kind of look down. Whereas others, they don't need as much of that intervention. But particularly for a concept that they haven't experienced, that they've never seen snow or hail, then show it to them and help them understand. You could even grab some ice cubes and say it's cold like this, just is the ice cube in the sky. That's fine to give them that sensory experience. Be careful with how many objects though that are around, because sometimes that can lead to a lot of, depending on the child, more dysregulation. So it's not like having a bunch of visual aids as far as lots of things, but it's more that you have pictures and different things for them to sensory code for learning channels. Auditory, visual, kinesthetic, tactile. And then you have light and thunder. Oh, I did not go through something. Let me go back. I talked about generalized senses and then something happened. So your 3 learning channel or your 4 learning channels, when you're in a generalized state where you can handle it, that's what you're in. But then your child may be in a selective state or a global environmental state. So there's 2 opposites. So a selective state is when they're looking at one detail. So they could be looking at a whole book, but they're actually looking at just the page number, and that's all they're taking in. Or auditorily, they're only hearing the fan, they're not hearing my voice, they're not hearing anything else, it's just the fan. That's selective. Auditory, selective vision. Selective tactile would be, I only touch these things, not those things. Selective kinesthetic would be, I can draw, write my name only. I can move only this direction. I can flap, but I can't point that way. I can point this way, but not that way or something. Then global would be, basically you're taking it all in as one unit. So then it would look like, kind of like if you get really bored in class, and you kind of hear everything, but you're not really listening. That's global. So we go into it, we just can control it more better. So global auditory is kind of having it all come in, and I've had some students indicate that they're hearing everything. That's where that sensory overload comes. So it could be that I'm hearing and not distinguishing anything, it's just all coming in, and I'm not blocking any of it out. So that's global, where you're just taking it all in. Visual global is just kind of seeing everything, it's unfocused. So usually if your child's in a global state, they're kind of just, their eyes are moving around, they're not really focused on something. Or a selective focus, yes.
I read, Soma's Red Book, right? Some part of it. Like, how do I as a parent can easily identify that whether my child is belonging to either of the category? Like what are maybe some of the ways I can look at it?
Very good question. So vision is easier just because you can look at it directly. So if you write a keyword, they look down, they're being generalized. If they're not looking at it, then that indicates either global or selective. Which one of those it is isn't way important. Most of the students are going to be more selective and generalized with the vision. And that tends to be his case. Where when he looks at the board, he can sometimes look at it just fine, but he's hitting right next to it, kind of like his eyes are like narrowing and grabbing up every single letter as he goes. So that inability to go from here to here is because his eyes are grabbing that. So that's a selective vision. So when you see the other selective signs of selective vision can be you give him 2 written choices and he's picking the most familiar looking one. That can also be a selective auditory where he's hearing what's familiar. So that's what you look like. I feel like for any of these, the more you want to look at is he listening to me or not? And that can be looked at as he's looking down, he's looking at everything I'm saying, and then his vision's engaged. And when you say listening, it's more of looking at, you can't necessarily always know that because it's an internal thing, but you can look at it as, okay, they're getting all the answers right, and suddenly he misaims completely, or he gets it wrong when he was listening the whole time. That lets you know, so say you're asking questions and you have no choice, and he's picking the first letter all the time right, and suddenly he misses. That shows that he probably flipped out into either selective, or if he was getting it right. So then you know, okay, so he either got bored, or he started to, kind of drowned it out, which is from boredom, or he got stuck on something. So generally speaking, you're kind of looking more at that versus was it selective or not. Unless you feel like you need to tune into, let's put both of them in familiar, so you won't pick one that's familiar versus pick it from the familiarity. Or so if you need to change them completely to be very unique words, or if you need to help them get it right by picking a familiar word and not familiar word, and a familiar word being right. So you check out more of that. Then the tactile and kinesthetic are actually the more difficult ones sometimes. It can be easy to see, but as far as handling it. So vision's pretty easy. If they're looking, then you know they're engaged visually. And a lot of our children are more, if they're not speaking at all, particularly they're usually not a visual learner, which is ironic because we use picture icons all the time. So, but if they're, and again, it doesn't mean that they're selective visual and that's what they are. It can be that moment. So when you look at the definition of RPM, it's in the instance of learning. So you're trying to teach the open learning channels in the instance of learning, meaning If at that moment they're looking down, you don't need to pick the letter board up or the key of the board up for them to see, because they look down. So at that instant, they were generalized. Then the next instance that they might not be, so then you pick it up. So I wouldn't get way over concerned about it. It can be very important, but for the more part, if you're writing keywords, you have a flow, you're doing the prompts and things, you're actually integrating a lot of it already naturally.
So does it mean that you're saying that perhaps at times they can be, let's say, having a global vision, and at times they can have a special, either of those?
Exactly.
It is possible.
It's possible, yeah. So, and there are some students that they tend to favor one or the other. So I would say your son is more to favor selective vision or generalized. He kind of flips between those two. Whereas others are like this all the time, they're starting and they're not really looking much, and they're pretty much always global and tend to get their attention for a second, and then look down and generalize and they go back out. And you'll see the same thing with vision, auditory. As they get more into RPM and there's less of that issue, they tend to do a lot more, just they're integrated enough that you can sit down with them and they start spelling for you. Even if they're having that issue outside of the sessions, or they're still having some, certain things aren't integrated all the way, of course, then, but they'll still be able to listen and do it just fine.
Sorry, Lenae, I had a
yeah.
question. So many times I'm talking about choices. They tend to reach for the choice which is like closest to them.
Yeah?
Like if my son is right-handed, so he will just pick up the one which is closest to him.
Yes.
Or even in if we are doing it on the computer, it's an online session, and there are choices. He tends to pick up the one which is first. So at that point of time, would you be sort of reversing them, or would the child think that, oh, she doesn't have confidence in me? Like,
Good question. So one of the things, online it's a little bit harder because it's on the screen, so what that just shows you easy reads. Or that word?
yeah.
That's it. So basically what I sometimes do with those kids, say read that, and that's the next one, read that. So once you have them reading both, then say now pick the right answer. Sometimes that works. The other thing would be with the choices, what you want to check to see, is it centered to the choosing hand? So, and that center is based off how they move. So if the students tilted in like this, then my choices are going to be more in this way, held not right over here where it's centered, because they're going to get over here. I'll tilt it like that way. But if they're going like this, I even had some that I had to hold it, like I reach across them and put it right there, because they needed to be able to hit both of those because of how they're handled. Now he's not that extreme, but just check to make sure they're there. Paper choices can be challenging just because it's so easy to be impulsive, because a lot of them do read. At his age, he's going to be reading something probably. I mean, I can tell he's already reading. He gets too. So he's already reading something, so it is just an indicator in that case that he has. So then he's not really selecting a choice, he's reading it and touching it. And that can happen with, even in testing, where some students we're thinking, okay, let's ask them to see what they know, but the student really is communicating. So when the parent was talking about, I was reading this thing that she was saying that her child started picking like the toothbrush, and they didn't know happy, and she wasn't answering the question, she was saying, I have that toothbrush, right? So sometimes that kind of thing can be going on too. In his case, I think it's just he's reading, so he's just touching if I have it, or the first thing. So you want to change it probably by doing first letter. If getting the choices centered on when you do RPM itself, not on the keyboard, is not working, then just do what I was doing a lot, just first letter stuff. Because what happens when you do this is, so if you're doing rolled or half a full, whatever it is, when you say something, we're talking about the economy, we're talking about basics or economy, he has to look through here, find the E sound, and then touch it. And that time slows him down to actually reason versus him going basic. So it makes him actually focus. So again, this could be a lot of tapping across if there's not the rhythm in play, so it's important to figure that out. But that's what I'd probably do with him if he's older. And if he starts feeling like that two-word choice is just feeling basic, then that can also be part of it. And I usually tell students that are older, particularly if they're in their 20s or older, hey, you know what, this is very simplistic right now. I have to do this in order to figure it out. I already know you're intelligent. It's just this is how we start. So that way they know, trying to get them emotionally okay with what I'm doing. Yeah, good question. So, yeah. So you're going to do this, and then as time goes on, you're going to expand more to getting them to ask questions, to getting them to do creative writing, and onto more detailed stuff. Let's see if there's something else I want to make sure I cover.
I have a question, Lenae.
Yeah.
So the whole RPM relies on the person's the child's understanding of their understanding of the words and letters. How do they? Sorry, the letters. How do they combine to form a word? But that also depends. So the question is more like me and my husband we were discussing yesterday. So one point that came up is first we try to teach them with phonetics, then we try to connect them always with the words. So what happens is, I mean, what we thought is if the child gets struck with phonetics to spell a word and try to find out letters similar to it, but that may not always go with the convention way of expecting of the word, then how do you correct them and bring them on to? I know my child doesn't have the phonetics problem as of now. She is going with whatever the regular way of words is taught. But in school, she goes with the phonetics way. I know, I have seen that this one. So I always feel, what if she gets confused and try to mix up, and then it goes nowhere between phonetics or the actual word and the essence. When if she gets frustrated or this one, if she loses the track, so how do you correct them? What do you do in those cases? I mean, have you seen that?
Yes, so what I would say is, for the more part, because RPM is very much a spell and write, and they hear the spelling, so there's so much teaching happening that it doesn't tend to be a big issue. But what I do, things like, say I have the students spell night. When I first start, I'll say, okay, now, the no sound makes sense, the I makes sense. Now we have these two funny silent letters. So, this is going to be a GH. So then I'll have them touch GH, and I'll say, okay, now the tough sound, get the T. And I'll say, okay, let's spell light. Same kind of rule as night. So I just try and teach them in the context. Sometimes the G doesn't say club. Sometimes it doesn't say, like I'll teach them those things. And that usually takes care of it. So this RPM actually does a lot with phonics. And your daughter actually is pretty good with just spelling in general. When she's focused, she's really solid. So, so I don't even, but with her specifically, I wouldn't get way worried about it. She'll figure out how that works. Okay. But you can always just jump in and say, hey, at school they're teaching you this, and you're right, E says, E or E or whatever. But in this word, it's silent. So let's just spell some words that it's silent. So you see the pattern usually end when it's silent. So you can do that, and you can show, hey, in the word seven, though, the second E is not silent, even though it goes over, and you can show those differences as well. Because we do have a lot of weird things. There's this guy that he has teaching English, but he's showing how funny it is. And so he shows just because it's like an IVE or something, it doesn't always say the exact same sound, or OU, of course, can change, is it ow, or ooh, or ah, or something. So you can go through that, and then as they read it, if you read to them and have them do reading that way, then it comes up. So I haven't really felt like the students were majorly frustrated with that, in part because RPM is so supportive as well. The other thing with it is when I'm teaching, sometimes I'll be extremely direct with them if they're not really going there, but normally I'm like, reach over. Then what you're doing with the prompting is you're actually teaching the student reasoning skills. So if I say to them, all right, spell the word night. Particularly when they're a little older, they've usually seen that word somewhere. So I say reach over, they can usually go, it must be a G, something like that. So that prompting, even when you're trying to train the motor planning, you're already teaching them also how to spell there as well. Now, it's not that you gave them the answer, you just help them focus, this must be over there, it must be an A. So that can be something that you've got to think about when we're doing the prompts, is that you're helping them learn the spelling as well. So because of that, most students are not going to be frustrated like a typical child might be, just because you are saying, reach to the corner, okay, oh, that's the corner, must be A. So they're going to be getting a lot of support, so it should be, the way RPM is done is you don't hear a lot of cheering and excitement, and it's not you can't ever do that, it's just you're trying to keep the students regulated. So if you're sitting there cheering, with the exception of a few who really need a lot of loud noise, then it usually helps them stay calm, and what you're doing more of is good, nice, I can see you try, you're saying a lot of things to calm them down, no big deal kind of thing. So the other thing on that is, any of you who have children that are anxious about getting things wrong, is making sure that your own level of anxiety is down. So that when they make, it's easy for us to get up in the air, right? Oh, no, it's not that, come on, reach out. And it's not really them, we're more frustrated with,
Before
how do I
them,
get
we
this to
get
happen?
frustrated if they are not pointing the
Exactly.
right answer. Yeah.
So it basically what you have to do is recognize that to model that it's not a big deal to miss, you yourself have to believe that. You know, so, oh, one letter off, no big deal. Okay, sure, just change it, that's all that happens. So you want to try and model that to your child and then they actually try more, or even say, I can see you tried, let's keep going. So if you have a child that you're saying, try to reach up to the corner, get a little bit higher, but not quite there, you say, okay, that's an E, keep going, they'll usually aim better the next time. Versus sitting there going, come on, get it, and 5 minutes later they finally hit E or no. But so you want to look at that. So that's another thing too is, yes, some of your children are naturally anxious, it has nothing to do with you, but at times they're also mirroring our own emotions and anxiety and fear. So the more we're able to calm ourselves down and just kind of go, no big deal, then they have a no big deal attitude too. If you find, because they may also, your children have a past with you, they don't have a past with me, it's just RPN, that's it. My nephew, same thing, he had a past with me. Then they've already encoded or put rules in place for you. So when that happens, you have to sometimes write that down. So if you need to, you can put rules in place like, one of our rules today is you have to mess up. So you have to pick the wrong response this time. So that also helps alleviate the pressure of, oh, I did it wrong. So I even had times where I had students where they got it wrong, like, yes, fantastic, wrong answer, keep going. Like, and so then I also model like, no one's carrying them, they actually messed up. And so a lot of them need that because, particularly as they get older, and usually even at 6, they've already recognized that they are getting a lot of things wrong that they actually know. And that can be detrimental to their self-esteem, so it's really frustrating when you know something and you can't get there. So when you do that and you start modeling this whole extreme different point of view of, it's just a mistake, it's not the end of the world, you just move your hand over there, you're gonna get it, then suddenly it helps them calm down in general. And so keep that in mind with your children. Which brings me actually to this point with Soma, I'm gonna read what she said, because I asked her about it one time recently. I just said, Soma, what do you think are the most important things parents can work on beyond the board? And she said something that wasn't quite exactly what I got out, but it was better. And she said, enjoy working with your child, don't look at the final step and get impatient. Feel his sensory struggles and assure him how you are impressed. So I think that's the key attitude of RPM is just that you're trying your best. I recognize this is difficult for you. And it's not an attitude of you can't control yourself, whatever. It's an attitude of I recognize that you tried. We're going to work together and get better. And so then just have fun. That's a key important part. If you have fun with RPM, then it's a lot easier. It's hard when you're trying to go, I can then communicating, I can get them here, but it will really help. So that's why, particularly if your children are older, find something you'd enjoy learning about. And say, oh, I found this really cool fact I thought was so interesting. That really helps. Or even for your child, because there's a lot of things you can teach to even a 6-year-old that's new information that's not hard to know. It's not inappropriate. It's just something like, oh, I didn't know that. That's how much lightning was sent down or something. So you can get interested in it, that does help there, which is good.
Question then.
Yeah.
So when you said prompt, right? So if, for example, if I want my son to spell cat or trying to teach him, so I don't think he knows the spelling of cat at this point. So you just go and prompt, say touch C, touch A.
So what you'll do at first is you're going to be going like this. So you might say to him, so kind of how I was doing a little bit down there, I was kind of giving him used to the idea of RPM, but we'll do that tomorrow for you with his son. So I would just say, we're going to talk about a cat, C-A-T. So I just showed him and taught him. Now your son's kind of moving, so you may not look at it. I might try to put it up in front of his face, or I might say to him, when you're ready, you can look at it. But you can hear me say C-A-T. Because of this world, most likely he's been exposed to English letters somewhere along the line. If someone's tried to teach him what he couldn't show, then he probably knows them by now. Or he's pretty close. So then you would say, okay, now, so you'd say, what are we talking about? When you do your paper choices, and then he picks cat. And then he said, okay, now let's spell it. So now he's had 2 exposures. There and then there are the choices. And then you can say, okay, first letter's the cuss sound. Reach to the center, and you can figure out how to spell it. Okay, now reach over if he's needing that. But you may be surprised. Based off just watching how he was interacting, the way his eyes were moving, he looked like he was pretty very aware of his environment. So he would it wouldn't surprise me if he's already reading some things. Even though he's not gonna say tracking like that, he seemed to be one that was very intuitive on things with that, just that little bit of experience that I had, just watching him read. He's a smart kid. So you may find that if you've already taught him those things, cat's phonetic, he may be just fine to go through it. But yes, let's just say he doesn't have that, he's not reading at all, he's not there, then you are teaching him here, and then yes, you're gonna just give him some prompts, like reach over, but think more in terms of you're training his motor planning and then having him reason through, it must be an A, not a B, kind of a thing. And at first you may go CBA just because he's learning how to pick up his hand, and so then you gotta get your gesture prompt a little bit bigger to help him focus and then fade it back. So at first you may need to do for anyone bigger prompts for bigger movements to get your eyes to go like that. So you have to think the gesture prompt should move like the eyes do. So you don't want to go like reach over like this because you don't want your eyes to go back and forth. You want them to go over like that. And then pretty soon it's just reach over and just a little nudge basically of your eyes. So yeah, so I'll show you with him how to do it. And he may be one that maybe spelling is easier than the choices. Some students with paper choices is very difficult. Just because there's so many impulses or just for whatever reason or another.
Is it always recommended to go with 2 options? I mean, sometimes we go with 3 as in
That's
sometimes with
Yeah.
Vasudha. So 3, I did once 4.
Yeah.
So she likes it. So is it like, if it is not daunting for the child, we can go with more options to just give them a variety,
Yeah,
right?
and that's true, yeah. So we do choices with 2 at first, but I mean, it used to be that Soma used to work really a long time with paper choices, and they would go to 2, 3, and 4. And so she wants to be stimulated and engaged with it. So I think for her, 3 and 4 options make sense because she wants to be challenged. Which essentially, the letterboard is that, right? When you show up at a row, there's 5 options, or so you are.
I meant on the board when we are writing, like,
Yes,
is it
yes.
a cat or a dog or a fish, or you
Yeah.
put 4 options.
Yeah.
It's more likely, she likes to point compared to just giving 2. I see at least my daughter getting frustrated
agree.
after some time.
Yeah, so you can do multiple choices beyond 2. Some students that helps them be accurate because they can't just impulsively pick the 2 and have to go, okay, which one is that? Yeah. So that's totally fine. It's actually
So
good.
related
Yeah.
question, right? Maybe what are some of the fundamental exercises that we can do? For example, choice is one. I noticed that you were talking about, let's say, math subject is probably another way of engaging the child. And there is creative writing and things like that. But maybe what are the very fundamental things as for a beginner like me, or some of our parents, that we should focus on that, where you feel this will eventually bring the child to a point where they can probably communicate better.
Yeah.
Maybe what are those?
So I mean, really, it's more you're trying to build up their sensory system to be able to handle the amount of options and which is letters that there are 26 options there. So what you want to look at is on one hand for him, I'm giving you this just so because you really have to look at him specifically and how he's responding to you is what I'm going to go about this way. So your first thing would be, does he feel when there's less letters like it's being dumbed down? So if that's happening, sometimes you have to do a little bit more. At the same time, sensory wise, he can't handle that many letters and be accurate for you, and you have to do less. So if that is happening, you want to learning to basically reassure him, I'm doing less letters, not because you don't understand more, it's to help your eyes get used to looking at this with me. And you can even say, I'm learning how to prompt you correctly so you can be successful. So that's one thing you want to look at, is being able to talk to him about it, because sometimes it helps the student to hear what you're trying to problem solve. So particularly older ones, and he's getting where this is a good time, I tell the student, this is what I'm trying with you, I'm trying to figure this out. Because and there are a few students I want to tell them my secrets, but for the most part, I don't want them to feel like I have this secret agenda behind the scenes. So I want to let them know this is exactly what I'm trying to do, or I can even say to him, I can see it's hard for your eyes to come down, so I'm trying to figure out a way to get your eyes to look. So I'm trying different techniques. And sometimes them realizing you're trying something and saying, oh, okay, well look, there. Even just saying it can help. So I even had a couple times with students where I started telling the parent what I was doing, one of them observing it, and suddenly the student corrected it, and they're like, oh, that's what's happening? Okay, fine. So it can just be a matter of, and I realized I needed to communicate more with the child. So just telling him, I can see that you're really stuck on the first choice of something. or I can see that you're just hitting in this corner of the board, I'm gonna try some ways to help you move your eyes or get more engaged, whatever it is.
So you feel like if
Yeah.
the child is not making mistake or if as parents we are making progress, there's no need to change perhaps or introduce a lot more elements to the exercise, or you feel it's still beneficial that we probably touch on different subjects because eventually it will help the child in many multiple ways.
Yeah, so as far as topics wise, you definitely wanna be very every day. So it could be science one day, history the next day, math the next day or something. And because you do need him to be tolerant of any topic. He doesn't have to like them all, but he has to tolerate them all.
I mean
Yeah.
more in the approach side, as in like
Yes, yeah.
from an approach point of view, not the subjects, but rather than, for example, giving options is one way. You know, using maths or maybe numbers is another way. Or I've noticed, like for example, sometimes you will draw things.
Yes.
So all those approaches should be utilized.
It's better too, just because the more you can do sensory-wise to help them engage in different ways, it keeps their interest. So if I see a student's getting bored, I kind of go, okay, I need to ask them a reasoning question. Do I need to draw something? Do I need to change up how I'm asking them things? Or even just calling something. So sometimes someone will say to them, do you want a math lesson or do you want a fun with numbers lesson? So then they get the same lesson, but one of them feels like it's fun. So you can do things that way as well, just to switch up. So switching up is important. That doesn't mean you have to completely change up certain things, but it's just making sure, okay, he needs more drawing right now.
In case their interest goes down, that's probably when we do it.
Yes, so, and that's kind of back to your question about how do you tell with the learning channels. A lot of times the way to bring them back from the learning channel is a different approach. So is it they need you now to write the keyword on their back with your finger? That can also, whoa, new sensory, that feels better. Now I'll listen. Or do you need to change topics to get them actually listening to you again? So a lot of that is really important. There are some students that can just sit there, write the keywords, say the thing, they spell, and they're fine with that. But for most, they need more stimulation. And as you keep going. So that's one reason why RPM, there is some kind of like a build-up, like two choices in spelling on 3 stencil words, a rolling board, that kind of a thing. But it doesn't mean that it has to be that strict. For you beginning, I generally find that most parents have to start with a more linear approach a bit. Whereas like someone can walk in there, find your child and put the full letter board in there and get them spelling. Like, so that, I mean, that's just because she can read it so fast. Whereas you're learning the approach, learning how to prompt, your rhythm's gonna be off just because you're learning, you can't, you know, it's like, someone tells you the rules of skiing, you can't just go skiing, not a deal. You have to now gauge your mind. So there's a knowledge learning, sensory learning, and the procedure. So immediately you can understand how the child can understand what you're wanting. Then there's a sensory integration that we teach you with RPM, which leads them to be able to actually aim correctly. So think about that. So the big thing is, understanding that, understand it's a sensory difficulty. If you get that, then it helps you problem solve. And then you're thinking, okay, we need to do something more. Say he's playing with something, with the spinner. That was very much a visual kinesthetic thing, so I know it's a visual kinesthetic tactile situation. So if he's way engaged with that, other things I can do is make something in the lesson visual kinesthetic tactile to get him to focus there. And so you can look at that. So maybe if you don't even have a fidget with him, you can kind of check where are his eyes. Okay, he's looking up at the fan. There's some movement. All right, let's try something more movement based down here to get into it. Or it could be something completely different, like a touch point. So like I'll put like a piece of tape on your hand. I was like, okay, stop doing that, or whatever. Or a hand sanitizer or something will help shock them out of that. So sometimes it's the lesson itself, sometimes it's something different sensory-wise. So foundationally really is don't rush the process, but don't get stuck on mastery either.
Right.
So if you're like, hey, it's a master choices, then you may have a child that never goes beyond choices because they need to be built to a higher level to get that. So someone has often said, go one step higher than mastery. So essentially, if you're doing okay with rolled board, then do the half board to get it solid down there. And then go back to it.
I have a question related to what you asked. So when you're starting out spelling, is it good to take turns and say that I spell the first letter, you go for the second letter? Because I've seen someone do that a lot of times.
Yeah. It's a good thing, particularly if your student is performance fatigue is setting in and they're just getting tired of it, and you can sort of build it up and get a great idea. Or if there's a lot of anxiety, then you're part of the process. I use it for sure. I don't use it consistently until I see that the student is not responding because they feel too much pressure. Or when the students start kind of like tire out, and I'll do something, because it does help them feel like, okay, I'm not alone working here, we're both working. And the same concept can happen with like, give me a word for this word. You can give an idea. So the same idea. And that way they're fun. Okay, we're both brainstorming words. It's not just me stuck with this. Yeah. So that's good. If I was to say what you need to do for anyone to have success with this, and I think you're already doing this for your books and those you read the books, that helps read at least one of Sophie's books just to get the final foundation. Either her red book, Understanding Autism, or the green one, they kind of have similar information. You can say my colors because they're long. So, for those two, you want to read one of those things first. I'd encourage that highly. But then other things for you to do to get your child there would be, one is that belief thing. Again, don't fault yourself for having doubts or skepticism, but just lead with belief with your child that, hey, you can get this, you're understanding me. If I correct these processes and learn this, you're going to get there. That helps a lot. Makes a big difference in how you talk to them and your interaction, the affect of it. The second thing would be knowing the positioning of the letterboard or the steps, the choices. So what you're going to look like for two things for where you place a letterboard is going to be the posture of the body matters because it's going to completely change how their arm can work, and then their eyes. So the eyes I tend to find are secondary to the hands is what I feel like, just because, and this can be described by different providers in different ways, but essentially if they can look at it but their hands aren't in a position to get it, they can't touch it. Usually because they can memorize the spots, like we can type down here without looking, then I find it a little bit less, although it's still important to have the eyes engaged. And there are some that the eyes engaged is really important to get them to do that. So they're not looking at all, you can kind of shake the board in their face and put it where it needs to go. So how do you decide where center is? So centering to the choosing hand is the word. So if they're right-handed to their right hand, a lot of times it's because you're on your right side, it helps to do the right side if they can, but it's not wrong to the left hand, just continue to reach across. So centering it to it, you're going to center it based off how the joints of the shoulder, the elbow, the wrist, and the fingers work. If you're dealing with an impulsive, high preference item that they're trying to reach for, they don't have motor problems. They're going to pinch you really hard, they'll have amazing motor skills. It's, for this intentional, this is a different pathway. So you have to look at it differently. So the high level engagement, so they're looking at an iPad, they're so engaged with it, that's more of an obsessive kind of a look. It's not the same as they're going to spell on a letterboard. So don't be looking for them to stare at that board perfectly like they do the iPad, because it's a totally different pathway that's happening. So keep that in mind. A different pathway in the brain can control the same movement. So my hand can point in obsession, like hitting over and over. I can point impulsively, or rotely, or intentionally. And we're training intentional, so therefore you can have a student that can point just fine and grab, for instance, your child. He can grab this and that, right? The paper twist is like, what's that? I'm not touching that thing, right? So it takes time for him to learn how to actually reach out and grab that choice. And so it's not that he can't. The motor skill is clearly there. It's just that pathway to intentionally go, the word was soft, and reaching out and grabbing soft was not there at that moment, so we're training that pathway.
So another thing I felt was like the reluctance to learn, right? Like he realizes that mom is trying to teach me something. When they realize that, they are on the run. Mostly, they're not interested, right? That how do we create interest? Like how do we make them sit and like make them point itself is like a big challenge.
Yeah. So a couple things I would say. One is a couple things can be going on because you don't know exactly what his preferences are. So sometimes outwardly it shows and clearly shows, but other times what's happening is a student could be running away from anxiety, not learning. So kind of keep that in mind. I'm not saying that he's all about learning. He's a little child, so he probably is not. He might want to just learn by playing. But so some things to do is, first you're going to be following him around. So try and get him in a room that's small enough because he's a mover. So I'll show you it there. And following him around. Then it can start with creating boundaries with just different objects in your house to kind of keep him in that area there. Will be your next step with that. So as far as kind of getting him there and then helping him be successful. Because sometimes they're adverse to learning because they haven't been successful with what they know. So based on what I saw with your son, he looked like he appeared to me pretty intelligent. So challenging him would also be something important to do with him, would probably help him a lot. And then how he presents it can be that. And some of it is just the consistency of doing it until he it's gonna keep happening, so I might as well just do it. And then of course, yeah, to make it more interesting, that helps. But the interest can be created by doing different sensory activities, or like I said, new information. Showing interest in the topic yourself can also be helpful. So I'll be able to answer it more specifically for you once I work with him for real. Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, so interesting lessons can also be another element that can help students, of course, do well, challenging them. So belief would be one, positioning of the board, looking at their arms. So basically this. If the student is moving like this, and you're looking at it for the letterboard, not for their iPad or their favorite activity, the different pathways of control, then you're going to have it further away because they're moving from their shoulder. And that's like, and again, in the instant, because if they're slouched, they're going to have a different movement with their hand. Maybe it's going to be from the elbow versus up here when they're sitting out, they're going like that. So if they're kind of stuck, no arm happening, then of course that also is a better spot for them. If they are moving their wrist but kind of closed in, of course it's going to be closer. So you can kind of see, are they moving their finger and wrist joint? Are they moving their hand but not their wrist a little bit further out usually? So you're going to check to see, can they hit the corners of the letterboard to kind of figure out what is their center. And you see a lot of impulsiveness, usually a little bit further away because they're just jabbing out before they're thinking. Just check that. So you'll figure out the position, and it's not like there's not this magic perfect spot necessarily, because it also is in relation to how you coordinate your prompts, and those things can also change it a little bit, but it can make a big difference. So example, with my sister, when we were first getting my nephew to do open communication, with me he was spelling sentences, with my sister he's spelling words. So I looked at it and I'm like, okay, your board is like an inch too high, lower it. She lowered it and he spelled a sentence for her. So it was that exact in that moment based off how she was doing it. But it's not like you can't get the same results in some cases if the way you do your prompts and stuff is a little bit different. You may have the same result, you may have a better time with a little bit further, a little closer, something like that. But the concept is still there with the motor. So that's one. We say center to the choosing hand, but at first you can favor the correct choice some because you're trying to build their self-esteem. So focus on building self-esteem, not that they show it right, they do it by themselves to influence, work on self-esteem and a teaching environment that's healthy versus kind of worrying that you prompt that or not, because you're going to be prompting. The prompts are critical, getting those right. So a lot of times people wait too long to give a prompt. The moment you see any hesitation, give some kind of a prompt. That's a critical point. And then the reset of their hand. So make sure they're starting their hand going down to the letterboard. So sometimes you would say reach your hand up like that and they'll pick their hand up to the right position immediately. Other times I have to tap the pencil and hold it up for them to grab it, or at first I have to actually pick their hand up and put it pencil in or get their finger pointing. So making sure they start it out correctly. So sometimes it's open-ended, you're on the full letterboard, you have the pencil and they're down here and they're just jabbing at this like that. So hold up the board here regardless of whether it looks like they're going to go down or up, just hold it centered here, there, and that will help. And then over time, it doesn't have to be so exact, just kind of keep it natural and they can kind of hit it. So around there is what you want. How your angle is, again, with their eyes and with their hands. Some need it like this, some need it like this if their position is a different direction. Some do better this way if they're like sitting like that. And then eventually, of course, you want them to be able to have it flat, so you let go of it, you can tighten those things. And of course, some of your children can already type or do some of those activities. So then you're looking at how intentional is that typing. There's many students that come typing, but not really intentionally. If your child already does some intentional typing, then that's really good progress. So you just have to look at, you also work on the letterboard being very fluent and getting it angled down to help the typing get better.
I have a question. Our purpose eventually, see, they start with letterboards, but eventually we want them to say tomorrow to communicate, use typing as a method to communicate with wider people, because may not always be they will be on letterboards every time, right? So I have seen cases, someone reporting as well on online forums or this one as well, that when they move from the letterboard based communication to the typing this one, they find issues or they have transitionary issues to the typing of the keyboard, how the layout of the letters is. So my question is like, isn't it much prudent to have the letterboard in the same format as the typing with the QWERTY keyboard, the way how the letters are there, let the letterboard be such a way so they can easily learn it's just the position of the letter, right? So isn't it so important that it should always be in the letterboard A to Z? Can't we have it the way eventually the other way out, because we now have so many speech to typing to speech conversion, this one. So if the letterboard itself is like a QWERTY, won't it be more easy for them to transition to the electronic way?
So a couple of reasons why we don't use that. You can use a letterboard that's that style. I actually will say, from my own experience, I don't feel like that's the biggest issue. I think parents are reporting that, not understanding the actual issue of going down there. Because once they learn to intentionally point, then it's more the issue of where it's at. So for a lot of those people having that struggle, yes, you might need to use a QWERTY keyboard just to get it fluent, but it's not a very big deal. It's more like so once they're fluent in letterboard, get a QWERTY bearer, get them spelling on that, and then go down there, and it's not a big deal with that. So why we're not using it is a couple of reasons. One is the motor. Right here, there's a lot of spacing, and so then they can it's easier for them to touch the letters. The amount when the QWERTY, of course, is 3 rows crammed together, and so for a lot of kids, they can't succeed.
Okay.
So that's one of the reasons for it. It's not like it's the wrong thing to use a QWERTY board, it's just if that's the issue, then you're going to be stopping the communication. So I don't feel like it's a big enough deal to completely change the process, if that makes sense. Because more importantly is that they can point down there or wherever the keyboard's at, propped, with intention. So for a lot of those people having that issue, they need to do things like shadow. Touch C down there, and they'll learn the formatting. And if you want to, when they're really fluent here, pull a QWERTY letterboard in, that can also be helpful. Or sometimes holding up the keyboard for a little bit for them to fill out in the performance field where it's at. So that's a key thing I really haven't mentioned much, is that performance field, like where it's supposed to be centered, is critical for their accuracy. And so it's more that they need to learn accuracy and intention in that area, and they should be fine. So yes, the kids that aren't looking down and scanning is going to be a little bit of a hiccup, but it's not a very big deal. It's just more, okay, here's a letterboard there, or let's transfer from here to the letterboard. One more idea with it is if they've had a lot of experience with QWERTY already, like they're impulsively typing down there, which I don't think your child is that category, but if they're impulsively doing that, then this format stops the impulses. So then they're not having that, okay, I gotta spell that word out because of that. So, yeah. But it's like, again, it's not wrong to use it, it's just that generally speaking, students need that.
No,
big
as long
layout.
as the transition is
Yes.
easy, there is not a question at all. But one point what you said is very valid. The spacing of the letters in this one, that's just 3 rows crammed together with a wedge shape kind of this one, which may not be so visually appealing for the child as well to point and learn, and this one.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
And really, when you're looking at RPM, because you're looking at purposeful movement or intentional pointing, you're also looking at, in the performance field, being able to point to maps and pictures. So essentially, if the student really has learned to be very intentional at that point, then, like I said, it doesn't really take that long for them to get used to that new format. Because you really are looking at just, okay, I can already spell in this area really well. Can they look at pictures and spell well? Can they look at maps and point at them? Then you just put the QWERTY in, it's like a new picture, essentially. Then they learn that formatting, and then they're fine.
Okay.
So it's not very long, essentially. It's longer to get them to spell without typing with intentionally with the same amount of depth up there, down there. And that's where your energy is going to be spent with. That's why I wonder if some of the people mentioning that are not recognizing that's what's happening, actually. That's not so much format.
I see in the one or two some videos that I was searching online only related to this. I saw this comment that we had much difficulty always transitioning from the letterboard to typing because the format changes and there is a reluctance for the child to learn and there is a delay in always in accepting it. So hence I asked this
Yeah, no,
question.
it's a really good question. I'm guessing that people just didn't quite understand that it's really an issue of where the performance field is. So for those students, one of the other things is a lot of students do better if we first put this flat on the table, and they get good moving here, and then we do the keyboard, just because they don't have it like, depending on if the keyboard is hooked up particularly, or it's a small, it's because it's tiny again, then this right here allows the stretching and movement down there of fluids. So basically they're generalizing this position to that position. And then you can start with a smaller area. So yes, and the parent can be right in the fact that it is close together, but it's an issue of it being close together more than the formatting. Because they can learn that pretty fast. It
So
doesn't take too long.
related question,
Yeah.
right? So just a question related to this is that first, when is the good time to transition to keyboards? And second is that, I mean, are you suggesting that we should perhaps mimic the keyboard right as we're doing it? Or is there a good time maybe when the child has reached an advanced stage that you do it?
Yeah, good question. So normally what I do is I wait for them to be able to spell a whole sentence with ease without stopping. That's not a firm rule because there are some that have been doing it for a while and need more breaks still. But the breaking shows they need to have the removal of the visual. So if the keyboard just sits right there, you have to be able to handle this being there for a long time. So that doesn't mean you can't work on keyboards, though some of you have already got your children typing and doing some things as well, and that's fine. So you could work on it, but I would do it separate from an RPM session is what I would do for first. In part too, because it's so much stimulation to trying to aim correctly and then go down there. So if you're going to work on shadowing from here to the keyboard, I would make sure that the aiming at least is pretty easy and effortless before you try that. So even if they're not fluent, the level that you want, you're not getting way a lot of depth, at least for TCHAS, it should be pretty pleased. And then see if there's motivation, because your other thing is the motivation level. Does the child want to do it? So new tasks. So for RPM skills, you have tolerance, education, communication, and skill goals that every lesson should have. So that's, if you think about that, that's how you function. So being able to tolerate visually different stimulus, auditorily different topics, people teaching them, mom's voice, dad's voice, the teacher's voice, those kind of things. Tolerating the things in front of them, tolerate leaving something there, so there's a lot of tolerance stuff that can go on. And skill would be the movement, or actually performance on, so being able to keep working with their hand and their eyes for a longer amount of time, and the time of the lesson. Then you have the skill can be the skill of handwriting, talking, typing. Don't give up on the speech, because when they have the communication with the letterboard, a lot of times they say that intentionality, and that's kind of a gateway for the speech. And some of those other skills like typing and handwriting can be magnified by just some of the speech coming out, like saying letter names or whatever. So just know there's actually a lot of ability that you can go with that. So skill of speech, it could be skill of sewing, of drawing, of walking across the room and grabbing something correctly. So there's a lot of skill goals you can have. Then your communication, of course, is reasoning, thoughts, stories, those kind of things. And then your next thing would be the education that they're supposed to learn. So in RPM, there's a lot more emphasis on applying the knowledge to yourself versus the amount of knowledge coming in. So when you look at the sentence, you can do a lot with one sentence. So, for instance, one of my lessons I used to teach was like the history of sports was developed to help with teamwork and the Army. It's like preparing soldiers for war. So with that one sentence, you have teamwork, Army, we do all sorts of questions with that whole discussion that can last 5-10 minutes long with that one statement when you start thinking about it. And it's not that you're going to not give me any more information, it's just that you say that, and then you say, okay, we're talking about the history of sports. Now tell me, if you were going to go learn a sport right now to practice, what would you want to learn? So that could be an opinion question. Let's list as many sports as we can think of. Did you see the Olympics? What sport did you like best in the Olympics? Those kind of things. Then Army, so you can think of what's some words that connect with the Army. Do you think your mom would be okay with you going into the Army? Or things like what do you think, what's the purpose of the Army, those kind of connections as well. And then teamwork can be a discussion on why it's important to work with others, which can lead into, hey, I'm trying to help you with this and that or whatever. You seem like you're not cooperating, let's talk about why it's important for us to work together on this. So you have a lot of discussions that can happen from that one sentence, and so think about how to apply it, make it interesting to have discussions versus trying to cram in 50 sentences.
About this, the tangential thing that you said. So when you write a lesson plan for a child, so what do you keep in mind? Should we stick with what we have in mind already, or can we go in directions that the child needs?
I say go with the direction the child needs, because really when you're talking about the instance of learning, suddenly you go, oh my goodness, like today, where he came in there, cracked a joke, and I'm like, wait a second, for what we're trying to work on with this questioning and discussion, this is a perfect opportunity to really work on that. So, You can definitely go with them, what you wanna look at, depending on, like, for me, my big agenda is helping you guys help your children. My big agenda isn't that I made sure they learned about how snow falls from the sky, it's just how do they learn the lesson with you, right? Whereas as a parent, you may need to go, okay, we've gotta get them through this amount of curriculum to make sure they understand this with his peers, right? So for that case, you wanna be more aware of your pacing, but you still don't wanna be rigidly stuck, because the more it becomes a natural flow for both of you, the better you both enjoy it. So like the day I felt like he enjoyed it more, that's my personal kind of thought. That could have been because now he's like, okay, I get you, kind of happy me, understood me more. But also potentially the way it was flowing, he was excited about it. And so then he calmed way down because of that was going. If I started becoming rigid about, no, we're talking about travel, not religion, then it may have kind of killed his joy and we wouldn't have had a really good discussion. And you would never have thought, at least for me, I never thought to ask him the questions that he started to say. Does that make sense? So I do feel like you're totally fine to go off. But you can also plan it, where you kind of go, okay, I need to work on these things, and all of a sudden, sometimes you might all of a sudden go, oh wow, I need to talk about, this is the perfect moment to segue for a new lesson. And other times you can plan it. So you can say, okay, we need to talk to him about, we're gonna go to this little party. So we're gonna talk about Band-Aids or whatever, and then there's this little part in that Band-Aid lesson that kind of makes sense to talk about parties. So then we can go into that and come back to this.
Because a lot of us are following you, sometimes. So sometimes it becomes difficult to just use the exact lesson.
Yeah.
We really need to tweak it a little bit and then make it more
Absolutely.
appropriate to the child.
Yes, and I agree, because like even my books that I write, the lesson plan, the one big drawback with them is I don't know what your child's doing right then and there. And even for me, I can take some of my book and I can sit there and copy a lesson directly for one student, the other student, I'm like, whoa, we have to flip this completely upside down, tell this point first, that point second, ask that open-ended question here. So you do need to have that flexibility, so you're actually recognizing instinctually that it has to change.
I have a related question.
Uh-huh.
Is it necessary to repeat the lesson again just to make sure the kid and the child understood what was being discussed, or once we are done with the topic for the day, never bring it back again, maybe after some 2 weeks or so, we should always give that gap? Or is it okay to just revisit again, to just give that emphasis again? What do you think?
Yeah.
Depends on the child.
It depends on the child to a degree, but in RPM, I think the big distinction is that you're not going to drill it. So like with special education, typically it's like day after day, it's the exact same lesson. So that you absolutely don't do. But it's not wrong for you to review. Kind of think more like in a general education classroom, teachers review things, but they're not sitting there reteaching, like harping on it. They'll reteach a concept that's we missed. They'll review, okay, yesterday we talked about these things. So that should be fine to do. If you feel like she's getting bored when you start doing that, then you may want to do your lesson first and then say, okay, now let's see how good you remembered yesterday and today's lesson, and then review it at the end if you need to. So you can play with that. So you can do normal, you want to be normal and natural with it, you just don't want to drill. Because particularly at first, like right now, she had moments like in the day's lesson that she was solid, H-A-R-D, no struggle, just filled it right out. Other times she's like, well, boink, it's kind of randomly just there. It wasn't that she didn't know at one point and then she did it at the other point. It was just more where her sensory system was at. So if we're drilling, what we're really doing is penalizing them for having sensory issues, and in some cases our own inability to figure out how to help them.
That is the big problem
So-
I am having personally. When she has sensory issues and unable to point out or something, I'm unable to put a finger on it to say, oh, because of so and so her irritation or her some other reason, or she wants to go, she's not pointing, or genuinely she doesn't know, so she doesn't want to point. What is the reason for it? That figuring out of the cause I'm unable to do, and that's making me repeat, which she finds it irritable.
Yes, and so, I mean, a couple of things there. The fact that she's irritated shows that she understood. So that can be something just to kind of go, okay, I'm going to assume that she understands, not the issue of understanding. It could be issue of aiming. You don't have to necessarily know exactly what she needs. What I kind of check for is it an emotional issue or is it a sensory issue?
Okay.
So what I play with here, and some of them cross over. So if I have a student that starts kind of whining, okay, it could be boredom, it could be something bothering them in their life, they could have a thought or a memory of something bad in their life. Or it could just be they kind of sensorily got dysregulated and they need their mind back in a regulated state, so math's going to work. So if I do math with a student, that sometimes calms emotion, unless it's way too emotional, then it doesn't do that. But if it's sensory-wise and there's like a, because if it's like emotional and sensory, sometimes that works too. They need, if the sensory is where it's kind of hitting their emotion, so it basically is an emotional thing, but it's sensory feeding the emotion. The math put them in a logical state, so then they start calming down. Then I don't sit there and worry about, are you upset about something at school? Are you upset about this or that? It worked, so then I know, okay, that's good enough there. For her, a lot of it is, there's so much, this is why, like for instance, I know that she's very smart because there's just so much sensory, that's what's causing all this movement for her. So because of that, I would pretty much outrule every single time that it's not a knowledge issue. In part because RPM is also, I taught you this, I asked for it back, and I had you reason about it. So if it's a teach and ask particularly, it's not a knowledge-based thing. And every once in a while she could listen or whatever, that could be something, but that's not generally what's going on. The reasoning place is probably not that, although she could be anxious about getting it wrong, not due to the difficulty of the cognitive part, but there. So I would say for pretty much all of your children across the board, it's more that's going on, not the struggle of, oh, it's too scary. Other than there can be times when the concept's very abstract, where if they don't have like a good visualization skill, that can make a student, again, nervous. Not because they can't understand, but they can't visualize it, so it's harder for them to grasp the concept of gravity if they can't visualize what you're talking about. So there can be students in that category. I don't feel like that's her issue. It probably is, when I feel like she gets bored, and then I feel like it's just a struggle of getting the sensory regulated. So for her particularly, a lot of tiny movements, getting her hand engaged, getting coloring, having her move her hand around and doing things right there, gets her eyes there and then she can focus more on it. So I wouldn't get way worried about that. And this is the other thing which you're kind of touching on. When they get open-ended, you have to be very careful with the amount of stuff that you're asking them about their personal feeling and emotion. You need to ask and figure out what's going on sometimes, but if it's too much, then they start just making up stuff because they gotta get you off the ground. So I'm saying that just as a caution of, you can ask your children what's going on, but just be careful that you're not pushing so much. Like if they tell you something, then accept that. If it continues on, maybe there's something more they don't know what it is, don't keep pestering them, essentially. But in her case, yeah, don't worry about exactly what it is, just look, is it more sensory, is it more emotional, and just keep teaching it. Yeah. It is a lot, because there's other things we can talk about to help her specifically.
How do you usually end a session? Or when do you know that, okay, I need to end this session?
For me, it's a timer that I do with it, and I usually kind of have a pathway, particularly when they get to open-ended, trying to be more creative at the end of the session, having them do more of their thought there. As a parent, you can sometimes gauge you need to take a break because you don't need to plow through all the time. There are times when your child needs to get used to the stamina, the time tolerance, so I can do a longer amount of time. There's other times when they're fine for 10 minutes or whatever, and then there's something really difficult sensory-wise that you either, one, can give them a break and that can take care of it, or two, you have to work more diligently to figure out how to work around that sensory. So that can be an important skill at times, but it also can be a lot to be pushing on that. So in regards, if you need to know you need to quit, kind of look at, did you get through your points, but in the case of, say, you can kind of tell he's off. He started out fine, all of a sudden he got off. Then you might say, okay, let's have you go get a drink and come back. So you want to do a couple things at home. Either have a timer or have certain points you need to get through. So either say, you have 5 points to discuss, or when this timer is over with, that's when you're finished. So that's what I would usually do, but again, you can be going, okay, you did a break for 10 minutes, we have 15 minutes left, because you need a break, you're going to pause the timer, take your break when you come back. Or we've got through 2 points, because you need a break, go off and do your break and come back for 2 more points. So you're going to have a task completion, but not a rigid one where you're going to torture the child into the amount. Like I said, though, sometimes it's important to build up their tolerance for it. So for any of you, if there's aggression, physical aggression, some will start out that way. You kind of have to push through it, kind of work on keeping yourself safe and positioning the chair and the furniture to help yourself be safe. Or I had one parent that they taped their and I brought you a tennis racket, and they'd hold it out like that and gesture so they could jump back because their child was going through puberty and very violent at the moment. And so they got through it though. He's in college doing things, but his tennis racket, RPM, tennis racket. So you might have to do things like that where unless you actually work through the aggression, then there's no way you're gonna get it. There's other times though that there is an actual point that is just too much for you and your child. And then it could be a lot of reasoning too, saying, okay, let's take a break, but I know you can do, say, 25 minutes for Lenae, so then we gotta work that out together. And then talk about, this is the reason why it's important for you and I to be able to get this going. And then he can, over time, kind of go, okay, this is what I want for my life, so I'm gonna have to sit here and learn how to handle that.
So you spoke about aggressive behavior. So a lot of times special educators and other therapists have told us that when the child is going through a tantrum, you should wait until they get out of it and then try to language it or reason it. So you should wait it out. But what you do is what you did today with my son was yesterday. He was screaming a lot and you were trying to reason it out then and there. So how do we know that they're even paying attention to what we say during that time? Do you assume that they will listen to us even though they're going through a meltdown and language it?
Yeah, yes and no. So two things, because yes, I do want to put language immediately to that. I would suspect that sometimes when he's screaming, he doesn't hear what I'm saying. But because I don't feel like the majority of the time, like when he's up in the air, that it's really for one, it's not a behavior. It's more of a sensory something going on. That the lesson itself can actually catch him and get him on into it. So this is where when I was kind of talking about when you take a break or not take a break, he seemed like one that I felt like sometimes pushing through with him and giving him support would actually help him regulate that need. Does that make sense? So, because he's like, okay, there's boundaries now on this. I'm not going to be, it's more like he feels supported. Does that make sense? Where, for instance, like in the corner, some kids like in the corner where we have them like boxed in kind of a thing, that really helps because like their body's going and we're kind of right there so we can keep them in that area. And it makes them feel so regulated because there's not this like boundless movement that can happen. Of course, there are a select few that corner is so anxiety provoking that that's the worst spot to put them. So for him, that was the sense, and again, I don't know enough about him to know for sure, right? My sense was that he wanted that little bit of a boundary to kind of push back, both kind of like with my body. So I'm checking with my body to kind of push back at the student. And if they let me do it, then I know they're fine. Because most of the students, they really can get across me and take me out if they really want to get out. So it's like a fear, anxiety. If it's really scared and anxiety, I let them out. If it's more of a sensory thing, we're kind of like just, and I usually try and keep them in the area but allow and respect the movement. So I would say usually with him, always start by reasoning with him, or with him, he can be distracted by the lesson. So it can be that, say you're working on keyboard, that's a little bit harder. Pick up a letterboard and start working with him for a second, get him calm and then go back to it. Yeah. So it may be like a sensory thing because like the day we talked about it, and that's a good question because even with RPM, sometimes you don't want to talk about why they're emotional. In this case, I felt it was safe to say to him, is it anxiety or is it sensory kind of a thing to check it. And then when he communicated and I talked to him, then he calmed right down. So I knew that worked and that he was reasoning with me. If he got more up in the air and it didn't have a single bit of a change, it doesn't mean that it wasn't that, it just means that I don't want to talk about more like the emotion in the instant. And I wouldn't ask him every single time, I would kind of check it a few times and I'd go from there kind of knowing this is what happens, this is what's going on. And then I would check it based off his reaction. So now that I think normally he starts getting up in the air out of anxiety, then I'm not going to ask him every time, I would just say, okay, you're anxious, remember, it's me that I need to work on myself. You're fine, do your best. And he works on that. If it stops working, then you might say, is there something else going on today? That way it becomes effective because he's not being pelted with the question. He's just here and there. So I don't know if that helps, but I would say with him it seemed like a lot more sensory because you built his skills so much that and it wasn't like you overdid it. You didn't overdo it. That's very clear because you've given him breaks and stuff like that. That he's able to handle quite a lot because when you can actually spell out some independent thoughts, like probably children can, on a keyboard where you really mean what you're saying, not just the basic wants and needs, then you have actually quite a long, high tolerance threshold because you have to stare at that thing sitting in front of you that doesn't go away. So that's what I would say with him. Yeah. And it doesn't always have to be, tell me what's wrong, it can be more, I can say that you're pinching me. Or you started crying, so something's going on with the sensory, maybe we're overwhelming you a little bit, or maybe you need a little bit of a dance, hurry, a little dance right now, okay, let's go back into it or something. And I think for him, you can have a very short break. Yeah. You need longer if there's like a high skill demand sensory. How are your ears? Are you all global auditory?
No, not at all.
It's a lot of stuff. This is the thing. Is RPM is not that complicated, but at the first there's a lot of little nuances and things, and so that's why I say read Soma's books, kind of get into that. We can consult even outside of this. You can send me videos that can help your child, and then we can really fine tune little tiny like bits of it. Because one child you can reason about certain things, other child you stay far, far away. You can mention the emotion, what's happening, you stay far, far away. It's just sort of variant on the child's reaction to life's past, what's happened to the child, and their mannerisms. So it's not competitive.
I have a
Yeah.
question. Could it happen that a child could do better with choices, but would have difficulty in ideation or, filling it up with his own thoughts and ideas?
Yeah. Yes. So at first, sometimes there's a lag, but particularly it can be a lag just because it's all of a sudden this airy field of I have to come up with my word on my own. So I do have a couple students that were so anxious about open-ended that it took quite a while to get there, and even now I have to be very careful about it. For the more part, looking at all your children that I've seen so far, I don't feel like anyone fits the category of that level of anxiety. They all have some kind of anxiety about it, but not to that level. That doesn't mean that they won't have it for a moment there where they're reacting because it's all of a sudden, oh, this is kind of scary, I have to come up with the right answer. So that can happen, and a lot of that's why one of the bridging steps for, we can probably go over this. So if you're going to go like a linear path to open-ended, which they don't all have to follow the strict pathway, but sometimes it's nice for you to do this as parents, is the first step after like a teach-ask with choices, then teach-ask with no choices, that way they're getting used to hitting the first letter without that, is describing words you didn't say but you both know. So you could say back on this rain lesson. So you could say, I'm thinking of the liquid that rain is made out of. You drink it, it's a 5-letter word. So then you both know it's water, and then you can look at what happens. Do they try to go to the W? Or is it like roll randomness completely? So you may need to go back to like a roll-up letter board if they're on the full board for teach-outs, just fine. Or just getting them confident. When they touch that first letter, you can prompt like any other thing, but that's kind of a bridge to help them see, okay, they're thinking the word I'm not saying out loud. And that is a difficult thing because now there's not an auditory echo. It's the past, their memory, their experience that's pulling up that word. So once they can do that, then generally, because they can think a word that you didn't say, which you both knew, then you're going to go to like word association. So give me a word that goes with this. And again, that one is pretty broad in that it's safe, but it's broad in that they can have association that you don't have. So like I had a student, I'm trying to remember what it was, but to me the word made no sense, but the parent knew exactly the connection to it. That's why you have to be careful with that one because they may be connecting something very legitimate to them. So if you said the word like bathtub, and they spell the word kite, okay, what's that? Maybe they have kite pictures on the wallpaper or something that you don't even know that's going on. That for them, that's perfect, excellent observation, but for us, it's one that goes with sky, that goes with sun, so you don't know. So there can be that going on. So that's the next one because it's fairly safe, but it's predictable usually. So if you say what goes with sky and they go CL, you're probably looking at the word cloud, maybe the word clear. If you need something that bridges between those two, then you can do something that has like a selective amount of options. So you would say name a planet, name a color. Because then they really have to sit there and be pretty selective. Particularly planet. If they're really creative, they might say cobalt blue, or they may say, navy blue or something. But for the more part, you're going to get, okay, they start going GR, you've got red or green. Go W, you've got white. So you kind of know where they're going to go. So that's another safe one that can give a lot of options to go with it, but it's controlled, very controlled. Then some students do better with word association, some do better with like word fill in the blank. So then it's just the same, really the same kind of answer, but what you do with that fill in the blank depends on, you can say, give me a fact, give me a reason, give me creative writing, something creative or whatever, or you ask them to do anything. So then you'd say something like, the sky is, and really it's a word association. You know, it could be blue or cloud or cloudy or whatever. So they can pick any word there. But it has a little bit more freedom and feeling of communication there. And it can sometimes be very helpful to get it out. So they may put an opinion that they're like, that fits you, okay, isn't thinking that word, but that makes sense. So once that one word is pretty good, fact, reason, opinion kind of a thing, then you can start, and that can be creative writing too, so you could say, one day, give me a character's name. Now, give me an action. So you can kind of do the same thing but story-based, and then you can make them make sense. So it can be quite creative what they come up with, but it's still very controlled. And then from there, you start doing like phrases a lot of times. If you read so much Red Book, it's chapter 15. Red Book, that some of this is in, not all of it, you can tell that some of this is in. You can do phrases. So then it can be the sky, keep going. And they have to at least do one other word, is, was, can, you know, and then something else. And then do sentences. So sentences oftentimes are going to be, make a sentence with these two words, or make a sentence with this word. What that allows you to do is when they get to the word that you're making the sentence with, you can prompt that to get their momentum back up and going. The other key thing for everyone to know is with teach ask, you can give gesture prompts, you can give all the direction. As you go into this open end, you're going to fade it more and more. So a lot of times you have to pull the board, write the letter, reset your hand, and put it down again to build up that stamina, because you can't gesture as readily as with this, because you can't, you know, they're coming with their own word. So keep that in mind. Sometimes the mistake is that they can do teach ask so well that when we put it up for open and we forget, they can't just spell out the word. It's not, it's, the confidence goes down, there's not the word, you don't know what the word is. So just make sure you're stopping and writing and building it up so they start doing 2 letters, then 3 letters before they stop, until they can do words.
When is the right time to transition from words to phrases? How do you know when we need to transition?
You know, the reality is that they can get a word for you pretty solidly, you can start doing phrases. And sometimes we'll even skip that step and go to sentences, because in reality, if you can get a word consistently, you can make a sentence, because it's just more words. You can make one word and keep going.
But my
So-
concern over there is using of the right verbs, or what should I say? The pronouns is, was, or what are those ones? That requires a lot of grammar understanding for them to speak that way, right? Or to say, use those words.
Yes and
How
no.
does a small child can learn that? I always feel particularly it's difficult for young kids to get that. So how can they transition to the sentences that way? Then you would be missing out on all those key points, and it's just positioning of the familiar words one after the other. Won't it be like that, or?
It doesn't tend to be, because it's just like communication. It's like children at a young age learn how to talk fluently, but they don't know the grammar words yet. Does that make sense? So when you talk about phrases, and you said the sky, and they put is, and they stopped, they would know that naturally they're going to keep going with that. Does that make sense? So they might not understand that this is a prepositional phrase, this is the subject. They might not understand that yet. You can teach them that directly. But for them to understand it as a whole complete thought, generally speaking, they'll know to make a whole sentence. There could be a time that they sit there and say, well, water, something, without getting it. And they say, okay, let's put this together. Wells are in the water. Now let's try and get those other words in there. And they'll learn what it is. So yes, to get them really good at their grammar, you might need to teach that later on, but just like you're talking, which is one reason why we try to keep it conversational in style, the student learns to spell out like they're talking. That's what it is.
Related to this, right, are there any perhaps already pre-made books, or perhaps, you know, places where we know there are certain levels which are already there, which we can practice, as in, if I maybe, let's say my son can do 9 out of 10 of these, then probably this is the time I move to level 2, or the same can maybe do 7 out of 10, then I can perhaps move. Is it like any set? The whole idea is that for parents, you know, for me to dumb down the whole exercise, to make it more, you know, something that I can digest and understand, and also repeat that momentum.
Yeah.
Is there, you know, if there's any resources if you can share?
Yeah, there's not really so much of that, just because in RPM we're trying to make it a little bit more organic in it. It's not that you can't take down. I was a school teacher, I did it in the schools, and I would do more of how many words can they spell per minute, so I didn't get in the way of their performance and make them anxious with it. So what I would look at more is kind of a and I guess there's some bias here on this when you're dealing with it. But you want to look at, do you feel like, for instance, on the rule board, that when you ask him a question, that he's getting the answer, he touches the first letter correctly, you can start seeing the consistency of he's getting the first letter correctly, then you know you can challenge him a little bit higher. So that's what you kind of look at, and it could be just 2 or 3 times in a row that he's getting it right. And so I wouldn't like worry about, was that a fluke or anything, just kind of ignore that, okay, now we're gonna do 2 rows. And that builds it. So then say he starts getting it wrong, okay, go back to 1 row, that's kind of what you do. So it can feel a little bit unsettling, because I know like ABA or some methods are very much, this is how many trials, this many trials, those kind of things. But if you look at it more of, we're having a conversation together, we're learning together, even if he doesn't always look at it that way because it's work, then it can help you just go, okay, you're making progress. So immediately, basically rewarding that progress with, we're gonna make it a little bit harder, we're gonna move you on because look how fast you're doing. Will probably, and particularly him, I did feel like sometimes he did better on more rows than 1. I think he won that feel of I'm moving on. So that's why it's a little bit, quote unquote, dangerous to be too stuck on the amount of, out of a number that they're getting right. Because then the student, oh, I missed, okay, I can't go on, kind of thing is that feeling. So you just want to look at a couple trials. In fact, like in school, for me, as a school teacher, I was supposed to write IEP goals that were like 4 out of 5 trials, or 8 out of 10 was like the 80% accuracy. And I got the point of that, but sometimes it's too much. Sometimes the best amount of trials in a session is 1 to 3 trials of something, and then you move on to the next thing. So what I'm looking at is, at first, I'm a little bit more solid in part because I want you to see as a parent what's happening, because it's kind of like, whoa, what are you doing to my kid, kind of thing. And it is, because there's a lot of little things you're watching and you're trying to figure it out. So I'll sometimes stay at a level a little bit longer so that you can really see what's going on, or repeat it, in part to get the child to know they need to be even more accurate, but also so that you can see the process again. But you just want to be careful that you start seeing it got better, you start diving, you know you need to stop before that. So look more for that. So he's getting better and better. Oh, now he's getting worse. Okay, I need to move on. So it's not, sometimes I will actually move to the next level when there's a wrong answer, just because I'm like, okay, they need to move. They're feeling stuck. If they're doing better on something they missed, okay, they want me to move on. And that's really important, because then he knows, okay, you're seeing that I'm getting this. You're not stuck on the fact that I made a mistake. Which kind of goes back into our whole keeping ourselves calm about mistakes, because then they know you're not getting all up in the air that I didn't get enough trials right or something. It becomes, okay, made a mistake. Life goes on. Yeah. So I know at first it's going to be so unsettling. When I was a school teacher, I was like, what do I start? What lessons do I begin with? When I was like realizing how smart my students were. And so it can feel just way overwhelming. So I would say if it helps you, I do have a book from paper choices to A to Z letter board. It starts with paper choices, then roll board. It kind of goes sequentially. So while the drawback once again is I don't know if your child needs to move on after 1 lesson or after 50 lessons on something. It does give you at least enough practice on each level to know that you did it. So if that helps you, you can go.
I mean, the whole idea was that just for me to understand, like, what are some of the beginner things, what are maybe some of the intermediate things, what are the more advanced things, and then assess myself and my child, okay, where are we really in that kind of whole spectrum, right?
Yeah.
That's what my point.
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. So because you have those 4 goals, you'll be looking at a few things. So when you're dealing with moving on to a new skill, one of the things you're looking at, or 3 things: emotional readiness, motor readiness, and sensory readiness. So emotional, I want to move on. This is what we're kind of talking about. You stick them there and they get emotional, like, oh, I'm going to be stuck here for 50 years. And I feel so that's one of the things, emotionally ready to move on, feeling safe. I can go to more letters, or feeling safe with, I'm not going to be stuck here forever. So 2 different things. Because some are totally ready for a higher level skill, but they're too nervous for it. So emotionally ready. Then there's a sensory readiness of being able to handle the new stimulus, the more letters, the kind of the topics and different things like that. And then there's the motor readiness. Basically, is the motor skill getting better? So kind of look at those 3 things, and that should help you also to figure out, okay, I should move on now. And you just really want to see, did my child improve for these couple of times? Okay, let's try a little bit higher. Then if it starts getting way sloppy, go back to where you were at, get a little more solid, then move on again. So it can even look like, this is why I like this one, even though some stencils are better for some students. Roll board, they're halfway through the word, now the word's being finished here, or the very last letter's whole board. So that can be really building confidence because the whole thing you can just kind of move up. It's not that you can't do that with the stencils because you can also do a free stencil and then you pull the full one in, but it's just a little bit more seamless with this. So don't, it's not like, again, say you moved on too fast. No big deal, just go back to this roll board. And a lot of it's going to be our learning with our child. That's influencing it, the pacing, just because those nuances of how to prompt, how to make the prompts flow. Some of you guys do some good prompts, just like the flow's not quite there or something. Could be another thing that you're
So I guess you chase for improvement than perfection.
Exactly, yeah. And acknowledge that. So the more you can acknowledge, I can see you tried, I can say that will really build their improvement as well. So we're replacing lots of compliments with, you got it, everything's fine, you're moving on, this is excellent. Kind of the feeling of, it's all okay, you're gonna keep going, versus it being, whoa, yay, good job, treat thing. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Did you have a question? Or-
Oh, no.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you're raising your session. Okay.
No.
That's good.
That's very, how do we make our child understand that this RPM method or the letter board is going to help him communicate with us? Like I have read about RPM and I know how it's being used to facilitate communication, but our child needs to accept that. He needs to understand that yes, this is going to help me communicate. But every time I take this letter board for him to communicate, he just pushes me away because he don't want to do it. I don't even know if he thinks in this English language because I have always used native language with him to communicate. So I don't know if he recognizes the letters, but I don't know if because he has never spelled for me or he has never spoken in this language, or I don't even know if he thinks in English language or like that. So, how do we help him understand that using this letter board, he can actually communicate whatever his feelings or emotions are? He needs to understand that this is to be used. The letter board has to be used to communicate with us, whatever he is feeling. But I can understand, like, how do we make him understand that this is how we communicate using the letter board?
Yeah, so one of the things, if you can just directly talk to
And
them about
I
it.
would be, I've never used, only after, it's the only last year that I came to know about this method.
Yeah.
So I've only just started in a very basic way.
Yeah.
But I've never got that positive response from him.
Yes, yeah. And that's actually fairly common just because he has rules for you. So a lot of it is doing what's called a mental mapping. So he could be pushing away once again because he doesn't want to do it. Or it could be, I'm anxious about this. If he does already understand, it could be, I'm scared I won't be able to do this, or something like that can happen too. But going with maybe he doesn't understand what it is, you can just directly say, okay, this is going to help you communicate, because he understands language, and you can even explain it in the language you usually talk to him. That's fine. Just say, okay, this is English because our language has too many letters that make it really hard, so we're going to use English, but this is what we're doing with you. So then there's that understanding, but then him to really understand the power of that is something that he might have to experience there. So what I find is when a student resists, if you keep doing it, eventually they start doing it. Because most of the resistance, like if you think about it, if they're resisting purely out of behavior, they have to be a really, really naughty child to never do it. Does that make sense? And that's just not what our children are. Generally speaking, children might go complain about it, but eventually they do the dishes. Like they complain. For our children, when you're seeing that much resistance, there can be a mixture of I don't want to work, this is hard kind of thing, but usually it's more like a sensory struggle or those kind of things. And of course it could be, doesn't understand what it's for, but let's just say he's not still understanding what that really means to communicate. What's the power of that? By just doing a little bit every day, he'll start doing it for you because he starts getting used to it. This is our pattern, this is how it works. So eventually he'll start doing it for you. And then with time he'll figure out, wow, I saw that word, this is cool. Oh, I can actually say this now. So he may be one that needs to have that, which can happen to us. We can understand intellectually this is supposed to do that, but it's not until we have the experience that we realize that's powerful, I really want this. So I can't say for him what's actually going on, but I would just say keep doing it with him because from my experience, these are not naughty children. It's a sensory things, there's a lot of other things going on, so it could be pushing away, this feels odd, I feel anxious, And it can be, I don't want to too, I mean, it's pretty difficult for children not to want to work.
He
So,
actually
yeah.
responds well when shown physical objects or
Yes.
pictures. Like if I show him whether you want an apple or orange, he will pick.
Yeah.
He will pick the whatever fruit he wants. But if I ask him to do it in the letter board, he will never do. Or if I write it apple and orange and I ask him to pick, he will not pick. But if I show him the physical objects, he will pick.
Yeah, well, some of that is, some of it's the concreteness of it, and he's just used to that, that works for him.
Yeah, concrete
So-
objects works for him.
Yeah, it works for him, and it can be something with abstract, but it could just be he's not used to doing it that way, and so he's like, I have this habit, when you show me the objects of the pictures, I can select that. And he could be like reading already, you never know, if he's been exposed to words or whatever, he may be reading, but he's still going, that's not how I do it. I pick the picture, I pick the object. So it's probably more of a rigidity of what he's learned to do and his comfort with it versus a issue with not understanding concepts. Although you can show him, you can get the exact same thing by spelling out this word, which means that if you learn how to spell, you can spell anything. Have a picture of it, because some things you can't. You have a picture of it, it's not a picture really to show you what you want. So you can talk about that. The other thing would be, I emphasize academics and learning to be a way to bridge him into that. Because it could also be an anxiety, or wow, I'm gonna touch 5 letters again now, look, I can literally just touch that object, you know? So it can be an anxiety, so you may for a second, of course, keep doing the pictures and that's working with him, and then for RPM, do your lessons with him, get him into that, and then show him, this is what you can do now. Now you can ask me for the colored apple you want, and you can also ask me if you want an apple pie or whatever. So then he can start seeing the power of that way, yeah. But what you're bringing up is a really good point, because it just shows he can have rigid rules for how it's done. It doesn't necessarily indicate difficulty with understanding higher level concepts. It can just be habits and pathways that he's formed to communicate those things. So it's pretty common that you'll have it, it'll look that way, where a student looks like they only understand one sentence because all they spell out or something. So it can look that way until they learn the purposeful intention of it. It's good. So it's good that he has some communication already. That's great. Yeah, and if they're, how old is he again? How old is your child?
He's 9 years old.
9 years old. Okay. So at that age, he's got more experience, so there's definitely things that he wants to communicate beyond that. But he also could just be like, okay, this is how life is, I can ask for those things, well, that's pretty good, you know. Not every child's desperate, you know. And then he may find later on that he's actually, oh, I really wanted that, or I didn't realize what I could have done here. So there's a lot of different reactions to it, because you never know. I do have some students that actually don't want something, but it really is not the actual thing, it's something else, like the anxiety of want. So I'll hear bathroom when they're anxious, because that word comes out in students' math vowels. But I'll even have the students, I'll say, did you need to go, or are you anxious? They say anxious. So they'll spell out anxious. And so it's just a word saying I need to get away from it. Or like even with sign language versus picture cards, I had some students that would treat and bathrooms just as urgent. So they sit there and flip around like, okay, which one do I do? Because the urgency was the same level, and they are attaching the urgency to the sign, even though the student knew the separate signs. So that's happening with a lot of our children, where they're just attached to an emotion, not necessarily the actual thing. So with the intention of our Okay. What time are we?
You've been speaking for a long time, I think more than 2 hours.
Thank you. Yeah, feel free to email your questions if you want to, like having a look at videos of your children after we go. Sometimes because our time zone is just so different, then some of the easiest ways is sending through WhatsApp a video and give you feedback. And then you're also welcome to schedule a consultation, just want to talk to me and get more questions answered.
So usually how long does it take?
What was that?
Like if I want to book a session, does it usually take?
Usually I can get you in pretty fast. Like it's a video thing, I just do it audio